It's going to happen pretty quick here. Okay, welcome to Hopeifiers. My name is Alan Friesen. We are coming to you from the ancestral home of the Blackfoot people, the very resilient Blackfoot people. That they're still here with us and strong with us is amazing with all they've gone through. So Scott Sweetman is my co-host for this show that discusses things that you wish were true, things about increasing your hope. That's kind of what we're trying to do here. But Scott has a different tack today. Here's what happened. The producer called me, the host, and said, what the hell? Don't you do any research? And so I said, Scott, what the hell? Don't you do any research? So anyway, Scott has something research for us today. What are we going to do? Talk about, Scott?
We're going to talk about despair. Yeah. The opposite, the polar opposite. And I'm sorry, everyone, I'm not really crying. I have a contact problem. I have a wardrobe malfunction. Well, maybe Scott, that's going to be appropriate when we start talking about despair. If there's a tear running down your cheek, that might be helpful. It is. Yeah. The research was so sad. And I'm so used to being, looking up so many hopeful things. But yeah, I think we should talk about despair. And sure. I think we should approach that. And I've got some interesting things to foreshadow. I did some research into how NASA approaches mental health for their astronaut program. So of course, people that are in the International Space Station and they're isolated for a long time, or they're, dealing with immense amounts of stress, life and death situations all the time. But they're people that you can imagine could be plagued by despair or certainly the absence of hope, right? So
definitely, you bet.
And they had some really good ideas and things that I'm going to share with you tonight. So first of all, what do you think despair is?
Despair, well, it's not just the absence of hope. Maybe it's it's not a neutral position. So it's like absence of hope.
It is. That's exactly the definition. Is despair is the absence of all hope. And I think that if you heard in my voice, I stressed the word all. And I think we'll come back to that, because I think that a lot of us have the idea that being unhappy is somehow abnormal, or that it's equated with despair, or, I hear people all the time saying, oh, my life's over, or, if I don't get this job, I'm finished. And, a lot of things that really are that inner saboteur coming out in us and saying, oh, how can I sabotage this? So despair is the absence of all hope, right?
Okay.
Have you ever felt despair or close to despair?
I don't think so. With the absence of all hope, no. I think, to be with the absence of all hope, that must also be, you have to be depressed as well, right? Isn't it? When the two go together, you don't have hope that you're going to be depressed as well.
I think depression is something that occurs with a time component, where despair can be in the moment.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
Like sort of as you're teetering on the edge of a cliff.
Here's I lost all hope in this situation. I don't know if you remember this. I burned up a truck here about a couple months ago.
Yes, I did.
All right. So I was driving it and I thought I could make it home so I could get to a fire extinguisher, but the fumes in the cab were getting too much. And I put my head out the window and kept on trying to drive it, but I couldn't. I had to get out. With the point that I got out, I had despair, because, oh man, this is gone. I'm not going to be able to save this. Right. So I still tried, but it was gone. So, yeah.
And I think that's a time component. I mean, you weren't depressed at that moment. You may be depressed afterwards.
Yes. And I had despair about one aspect of my life. I wasn't, not everything, but all hope for that truck surviving was gone.
I think that we've already hit on some really important things, right? The despair is not something that occurs in every part of your life at the same time. Often it's something that often happens in a moment and is relatively done quickly, like that moment of despair. And sometimes we have trouble remembering that. A lot of poetry, our friend Rumi talks about despair and how, those things are fleeting. When I was doing this research, there was a lot of self-help and poetry and things that touched on the idea that usually suffering is really transitory. It's something that, like you said, in that moment, but knowing you really well, or at least I think I know you really well, not too long after that, you were probably thinking, okay, where can I find another truck? Or, how can I make this situation better? Or, right? Am I wrong? Or did you just fall down on the ground and say, I give up, I'm done?
No, I was not like, this wasn't a Job moment. I didn't feel like God was against me. It was just like, it was more, Alan, doing this, wouldn't you take a fire extinguisher with you? You're a responsible adult, aren't you? So, but that was kind of that. It was a little bit of self-correction for next time. I'm going to get it right. So,
and I think that's really important. And that's that relationship between despair and depression and sadness and those types of feelings, is that often those moments of despair only exist for a short time. But if we let them transition to depression or, self-loathing or self-defeatism, those things, they very quickly stay with us for a lot longer and can actually do a lot more harm to us than that moment or two of despair.
You know what you made me think of right now? Do you remember we talked about that book by Jill Bolte Taylor called The Whole Brain Living?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, so I've bought the book, had to have it, haven't opened the cover. I've had it for 3 months, but I just got too many other things to get on. But anyways, I watched the video.
By osmosis. Every time you pass by, you're absorbing some by osmosis.
Exactly. Some of it is coming into me, yes. But actually, I'm going to open the pages and look at them. But I did watch the video that she did when she launched the book that prompted me to launch the book. And basically, one thing that she was saying is that an emotion has a life cycle. And it's like, I think it's like 27 seconds. Every emotion has a life cycle, right? And so knowing that there's going to be a cycle that's going to occur. And at that point, you're making the decision to perpetuate that cycle, right? So once you've experienced whatever that was, pain, the sadness, the sorrow, the happiness, whatever it was, it comes through and it cycles through. Now it's up to me. I make a choice. I can make a choice of whether I want that, going to allow that cycle to continue, which I think is fascinating. But but it makes sense too, as well, right? A lot of what the challenges we have are with the self-talk that follows us, right? What we tell ourselves afterwards, right? Good.
And I think you brought up a really good point, is that when we're in those situations, we need to remind ourselves that if we can just hang on for that short cycle, that we'll make it through that time as well, and the situation will change. That doesn't mean that it's suddenly going to be fixed and everything's going to be, a circus and clowns and popcorn. That's a really strange analogy. Anyway, it does. I don't know, I had clowns on the brain, but if often.
Wait a minute, didn't you say you were scared of clowns?
Not me, no. I know people that are.
Yeah. Some people are scared of clowns. Anyway, sorry to interrupt. Yes.
Yeah, no problem.
Carry on.
I suppose if I was alone in a room with like 40 or 50 clowns, I might be.
That'd be weird for anybody. Yeah. So
weirded out by them, but generally happy fellows. Anyway, so I think that, I know like a lot of the sort of white coat syndrome or things that the anxiety that I sometimes feel, like when I, recently went in for an operation, and all the flashbacks of, the coma and all of those things, like when doctors lean over me, when I see a bunch of white coats leaning over me and I'm laying down in a bed, it triggers me. And, I have this moment of, can I fight my way out of here? Can I flight my way out of here? I need out of here now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And as long as I, for me, I just keep saying, okay, it's only going to last a few minutes. And the situation will change. You're going to look up and they're not going to be there, or you're going to be wheeling somewhere else, or just hang on for that duration. And I think that's what you were talking about, right? Is often that, and I'm not, putting out there that people should endure abuse or those types of things. Absolutely not. But I think sometimes when we feel triggered or when we feel that despair, that we can use that inner voice to say, if I can just ride this out for a short period of time, I'll be okay.
Right. Yeah. I mean, really, if you reminded yourself well enough, it could be where it reminds you to take 3 deep breaths, right through the nose, fill in your diaphragm, your lower abdomen, release through the mouth. You do 3 of those in a very gentle, slow cycle. That emotion has elapsed. It's over, right? Now you can kind of start fresh, right?
I think there's been a lot, and I ran into it a lot, that fast, slow breathing, right? And in all sorts of walks of life to deal with that type of anxiety. And there's lots of mechanisms for that. And I think we're going to talk about some of them tonight, but we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. So we understand what despair is. We agree on what despair is, right? We agree. We also have picked up some salient points here, right? There that despair is short-lived, like all emotions. What'd you say, 27 seconds? 27.
I believe it was that. I should read the book, but I believe that was what it was, 27 seconds.
Yeah, something like that. Anyway, it does end. That's the point, right? And often we allow that moment or two of despair to turn into a longer period of suffering than it perhaps needs to be.
Maybe it's right here in the index.
Yeah, we were given a plug there. That's good.
This woman, I told you about her. Every time you see her, she's holding the brain. Every time. She's got a picture, and she's holding the brain. It's a real human brain or a model, but she's got one in her hand all the time she's talking.
When I was in Cambridge, we had a professor, and very interesting professor. I won't say her name because she now does a lot of documentaries for the BBC. But she's, at that time, well, still apparently, she's an expert in ancient sexuality, right? In the ancient world, Romans and Greeks. And she could never give a lecture without laying down on the table or the desk in some sort of feline position. Like it was, I don't know how her brain worked, but inevitably her lecture ended up with her sort of reclining across her desk in a lecture hall with all of us there. So yeah, not quite as intellectual as a brain, but I think people sort of have those things. And
wow. Okay, that would have been very interesting. I don't know if that would be a draw for her class or not. Her lectures would be better attended or not. But
she was brilliant. Once she started talking, you basically didn't see her anymore because she was just an amazing intellectual. But anyway, yeah. So brains laying on the lectern or the table there, academics. What a crazy kooky bunch. Okay, so she's always got a brain. We don't know how long it is, but we do agree that it starts and it ends in a relative period, right?
Right, exactly.
So now I think most people out there, most of our listeners have felt despair at some point. Mm-hmm. We both have felt despair momentarily. Mm-hmm. You and I come from the same sort of mental space where we don't like despair. We don't like feeling negative. So we work pretty hard to not feel those things. We're kind of hopeful people, right?
That's true.
But so our feelings are a little bit skewed on this, but in doing the research, one of the big things is that moment, instead of letting the despair go or riding it out, where we internalize it and we make it about a failure of our own.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Sure, I do. Yeah, exactly. Where the self-talk is, oh, you should have saw this coming. What are you thinking? What kind of an idiot does this? Right? Those kind of words. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
What business did I have trying this? And, I shouldn't have ever thought that I could do this. Or,
okay, that's even an extension, right? That's saying, I knew I wasn't good enough to begin with. Why did I even try? Right? It's even going further, right? So, yeah.
But I think most of our listeners can think of a time where that's happened, right? Where something happens, there's that quick flash of despair that, oh my gosh, this is all going sideways. And then we start internalizing that. So in the stuff that I've been researching, that's the point right there that you really need to get a hold of things, is if you can turn it around there, if you can stop it from your internal saboteur turning it into a being about you and your failure. And if you can, sort of write it out and accept the situation the way it is and realize that you're going to pass through it, usually you'll come out the other side pretty much okay. I mean, not always, obviously, in moments of despair, we may physically or mentally suffer. But the trick is to minimize it, is not to internalize it and get on that sort of negative hamster wheel, right? That, we know that negativity feeds itself. It's like a brush fire, it just keeps going and feeding and feeding. So some of the things, and this is what I really wanted to get to tonight, was the tools that we can use to end despair and bring about hope.
Excellent.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so the research that I was looking at were tools that organizations and individuals use. And then, I challenge you not too long ago to think of some tools that you use, keep in your tool belt, to deal with those situations. And, I've thought about my own situation and some of the tools that I use to deal with it. Do you want to throw one out there? Do you want to take the first step?
Well, I can tell you in terms of your capacity for your the potential capacity you have. For me, singing is an activity that rejuvenates, that builds that capacity, that resets my emotional, I'm expressed emotion. I feel kind of sated, if you will, and physically is really, really good for me. So physically, emotionally, mentally, singing is kind of my therapy and my exercise. It's like, so it's something to restore my capacity to be at my best possible version, if you will, I think.
Well, and it's interesting because that's, when I looked at NASA and I looked at, a lot of the situations where programs or situations really needed to bring people back from the edge really quickly, right? Like, if you're on the International Space Station and you go into a fit of despair and spiral out of control, there's a big problem. Like, people's lives are at risk, right?
Yeah.
Not that they're not back here on Earth, but
right.
Obviously NASA is going to invest time and money into figuring out what's the best thing to do when our people, when the oxygen starts to shut down, how do we keep them from doing that? And you have it figured out, and I don't know if it's intentional or unintentional. I know it's intentional now, but the first thing always, if everything is going wrong, the first thing you need to take care of, and our Boy Scouts out there or Girl Scouts, Brownies can probably tell us this, you have to take care of the physical first. Okay. Mm-hmm. So like, your singing is really a physical activity. You're explaining, and I know you had it up before Facebook harassed you into taking it down, about the vibration and the expelling your breath and creating that vibrancy in your being, that physical activity. And that's one of the things that all of the programs I looked at had in common, is the first thing, like if you're setting out to deal with despair or depression or any of those things, the first thing you need to do is bring your physical being back in line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense, right? That's immediate, right? That stopped the bleeding. That's yeah. I get that. That makes sense.
And
this
so
is priority one. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not, like, oh goodness, I have to lose 100 pounds before I can be happy. It's anything, setting aside that 1 or 2 minutes to engage in something physical, even screaming. I remember reading about scream therapy, where for a while, and it's still maybe popular somewhere in the world, where doctors would encourage patients to scream, and that physical act of screaming and turning all that internal pain and turmoil into a physical release of energy was considered therapeutic, right? Crying is a mechanism of physical therapy. Right? Humming, dancing, singing, any of those things that you can do to physically get your body to start doing all those great chemical things we've talked about before, because we are already equipped with our internal pharmacy, right?
Mm-hmm. You bet. Yeah, exactly. And we just have to activate it and mostly by just moving our body, right? Getting our body moving, right? And it's one of that thing that's beautiful about it. For that, does that person who needs to kind of make an intervention to avoid spiraling off in despair, that movement type thing, do they need anybody? Do they have to have a buddy to do it with? Do they have to go to a special place to do it? No, it's like right here, right now, you can do it, right? So it's a tool, like breathing as an example, right? If you become conscious about breathing, it's a tool you have with you all the time. This guy I've been listening to, Deshai, I don't even remember his last name. Anyways, he's talking about that when the breath in is an affirmation that you are enough and always have been enough. The breath out releases anything that holds you back. The breath in is an affirmation that you are enough. And that's true. If you're breathing, you're enough, right? Then the fact that you're still here, that means you've been enough in the past. So you're going to be enough tomorrow as well. So love it.
That's a great point. And I think that there's so many examples of that. And I know that education has made some progress in that area. When I was young, 100 years ago, kids often, when they're taking a test or when they're answering questions, wiggle or fidget, right? They'll wiggle their feet and I was a big fidgeter. And teachers would always say, sit still. And, they would discipline you for jiggling or wiggling or, tapping your feet or doing those things in class, in your classroom. Did you ever get that? Did you ever get?
Yes, I did. And then I had one teacher actually, and I forgot all about this. One teacher when I was a little, like, I don't know, 7 maybe or something like that. And we were doing the singing in the class and I was like tapping on my body to try and keep the rhythm kind of a thing. And then she had mentioned it in it like that I was moving in a positive way, right? But no, every other teacher was like, stop that, sit still, that kind of thing, right? So yeah.
Yeah, in our schools in Japan, we used to have dancing, and we would just break, when we could see that the kids were getting stressed and that they were starting to, escalate.
Yeah.
We would just, get everyone up and we'd put on some happy sort of bouncy, make you want to move kind of music. And the kids and the teachers would all dance around for a few minutes. And, then everyone would sit down and get to work. And we had a lot of teachers that would come in and be guest teachers for us and work with us, for periods of time while they were there. And inevitably, from certain cultures, teachers would come in and say, "Oh, what are you doing? They will never settle down and learn. And, they have to focus and you're destroying all of that. And this is not a classroom. This is, chaos or the playground." Yeah. And the opposite was true. After
get up and go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that you could see in the children and the teachers that after they had a chance to sort of let all of that negative energy go, because just, freestyle dancing, just moving your body to music is therapeutic. And it clears your mind and it lets you focus and it lets you concentrate.
You know what else about it too? It's not like, and this is not applying to kids, but you think about it as an adult moving their body, they might have a limitation that's developed through they had this knee injury or this shoulder injury, and there might be some specific activities, running or CrossFit or whatever that aggravate that. But if it's dancing and they're moving up to the limitations, for the full range of motion that they have. So it's kind of cooperative with what movement you can easily and freely and pain-free do with your body, right? It's not,
yes,
this sport requires me to do X. When I do X, my shoulder hurts, right? It's you move your body to the extent it's pleasurable, right? That's sort of the way I see it. So it's way more gentle on your body.
And I think we often get in the mentality of it's all or nothing. Like you have to be able to jog for 5 minutes or forget it.
Right.
Yeah. And every time I hear a report that says, if you don't exercise for 20 minutes, it's worthless. I think really, because there's just as much research that says exactly the opposite, that
Exactly.
any
Yeah.
kind of movement, any kind of, we're creatures that are meant to be moving. And,
I got to tell you, Scott, as you note, I move a lot when I'm doing these things, and I do this all day. I'm in Zoom meetings all day, right? And I stand here for all of them, and I move as I'm doing them. And this just kind of happened by accident. Sister Serendipity, give me a little shove again. Thank you, Sister Serendipity. But basically, it's just doing it. My energy level increases, my attention level increases, and my torso's like toning up and I'm losing weight, right? It's just like, holy shit, that's awesome, right? And all it is standing, right? So, and I enjoy it a whole bunch more. I see people in the Zoom meeting, it's like, they're at their desk and their heads down, and like, and so I try to be engaging. If somebody says something interesting, I go, give them a little wave. One time, I think is the last meeting, the Silverberg group meeting, I think they thought, is he having a stroke or something? I said, no, this is my way to applaud. Good job. That's a nice one. So, yeah.
But I think those of us that have known you for some time, and, we unfortunately haven't known each other for our lifetime, but I've known you for a long time now.
You have.
And when, how do I say this without sounding terrible, but when you were more traditional in terms of how your behavior in meetings, and when you sat there and were the proper sort of businessman, stoic kind of engage, leaning forward and nodding at the right time, your health was nowhere near as great as it is now. Right?
You are entirely right, my friend. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And then it takes a little bit of getting used to. As I remember the first time I actually noticed that you were weaving back and forth, I was like, what the heck is Al doing? Like, and then we talked about it, and for sure, you can see the difference. Like, people listening to us right now, they may think, yeah, that's a little crazy. But the truth is, it's not the only thing you do. You eat right, and, you've got a great mental attitude and things, but physically, you've de-aged. You're younger than when I met you like 15 years ago. Really, physically you are, for sure. I would say mentally too.
It's definitely true. And one thing I learned, and this again is serendipity helping me out, is that my body doesn't like sitting. And I was forcing sitting in meetings, forcing sitting in driving, 40 hours a month driving, sitting in the car, right? So I was spending a whole bunch of time sitting, and I had like hip things, and my buttocks was sore, and like I had these pains and aches and pains and that kind of thing. And now I'm moving more, and even my shoulders have got better, my neck's got better, everything's working better, right? Even my gimpy knee that is just like toast, like I beat it up really bad ski crash, then a parachuting crash too. But those two things, I really beat the hell out of my knee, and so it's screwed. But this movement, again, going to the extent that it's pleasurable to move, my knee is actually improving a little bit. And that's like just a physical beat, damaged knee, right? So, yeah.
Well, and this is reinforcing what I was saying earlier, that the first thing that, NASA and so many organizations say is just start moving. One of the most, unless there's a medical reason, like you've hurt your spine, in a traumatic situation, is to start your body moving. And, they even recommend, like in a confined space, to, you don't have a track, you can't go for a walk outside, but if you tape off a space and make that your exercise space or your movement space, then psychologically you get a boost from that. Like your brain is saying, oh yeah, we're doing this thing. And it sees it in a really positive way, and brings that out. I remember when, you were sort of in the traditional meeting mode, is after about 40 minutes, you were getting really like, well, me too, everyone, I'm not saying it's a weakness on your part, but you really hated those long meetings where you had to sit there and, sort of stare at each other and rah, 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 rah. Everyone hates those. But now, obviously, you really enjoy meetings, right? Because it gives you a chance to move and to be.
Yeah, right? Exactly. And I was really very self-conscious going to my like in-person meetings, right? Because I thought, oh man, people are going to think, what is with this place, right? And I'm sure some of them do, but I don't care. Even when I go to Rotary, I eat my meal, I sit down, then I take my coffee and go to the back of the room and stand for the rest of the meeting, right? And so every meeting I go to, I'm standing, I'm sitting just for the shortest duration I have to do that part, because I know that it does not feel good for me to be sitting. So my chiropractor, I have a new chiropractor, Dr. Jeff Warren, amazing chiropractor. He's excellent, but I go to the first time I go to see him, and I go into his little thing. He says, "Oh, sit down." I said, "No, I'm standing." He says, "Oh, that's a great idea. I should be standing, but I'm tired. I'm going to sit." So the next time I come in 2 days later, he says, "You're standing. That's great. Good for you. Standing is a good thing. I'm going to sit." But anyways, yeah.
I think it has to be reasonable. I think that two things: keep it reasonable, right? Keep it real, keep it reasonable, and don't think, like for me, I can't stand as long as you can physically. No. My body just won't take it. But if I use that as an excuse not to stand every chance I can, then I'm doing myself a disservice, and I'll never get to the point. I remember after my coma, that my physiotherapist, I only had 1 day with him, Japanese physiotherapist, and his English was not great, and my Japanese was never and will never be great, but he got it through to me by poking and drawing pictures. And he said the most important thing for me to rebuild was my muscle to stand up, the muscles on the front of your thighs. And his message that is, if you lose the ability to stand up, you're in trouble. Like, it's really hard then, and standing up is so good for us.
Yeah.
That,
Doctor,
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to reinforce Dr. Michael Clapper. Kroll and I have been taking this master class on plant-based nutrition from this Dr. Clapper, and it's actually designed for doctors, is what the course is, right? So very, very in-depth, like really, really in-depth course. Great course. And anyways, in there, he talks about people who are in advanced years, not you, Scott. I'm not talking about you, right? They're talking about people in advanced years. And then the point that they can't get out of the chair on their own anymore, right? When they can't do that, that's like a very clear sign that things are going downhill in a big way, right? I mean, I'm not just saying 1 day. I'm saying all of a sudden they can no longer get out of or eventually they can no longer get out of the chair, and that's a permanent thing. That's speaking very poorly for how the future is going to unfold for them health-wise, right?
Well, we talk a lot about culture and traveling around, and I've traveled a lot and lived in different countries. And when you look at a senior population that's relatively healthy.
Hang on a second, Scott. I lived in different countries. I've traveled to different lands. That's the lyric from Soul of a Man. Go ahead, carry on now.
Cool. Is when you see a population, an elderly population, and again, I'm talking, late 80s, 90s, and beyond. If they're still healthy, it's usually because that culture has within it a tradition or a culture of remaining mobile.
Yep.
And I think back to my grandfather, Sweetman, and he died of an accident, not his fault, somebody else's fault, at 93, and he was in perfect health, but he never sat down. Like, he was always, when he were tired, he would come out to the farm and he would dig ditches for the rainwater to run. He would go out and fill gopher holes, and he just always kept moving.
Nice.
And
yeah,
he didn't take medicine.
Yeah.
I was in my mid-20s the first time he ever took an aspirin. He'd never had a headache in his life. He didn't know what a headache was.
Nice.
And it's not an exaggeration. And he wasn't like some Superman. He was just an ordinary farmer, central Alberta, but move all the time. And not like, oh, I'm going to go out and run a mile. Just, he was always in motion.
Yep. Well, again, back to Dr. Michael Clapper, then he talks about that as, there's an actual word for it, hormesis, I think it is, where the appropriate stress on your body makes it respond in the most healthy way. It builds bone, it gets rid of waste bone, it builds muscle, it gets rid of waste muscle. That whole process is what rejuvenates and and stops, if you will, or slows the aging process is moving, right? Because your body's recovering through that process, right?
Well, we've hit on some good tools for getting rid of despair. And I think that the other thing we can comment on is recently there's been a lot, if we look at cultures that have really active senior populations, recently it's been sort of vogue to say, oh, that's because of their diet, right? Mediterranean diets, Japanese diets, or other Asian diets, low red meat, high vegetable, and all of that's true. But they also have a really strong culture of seniors are not, sort of, oh, here, sit over here, you don't have value anymore. The cultures really go out of their way to say, sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, it's where the culture values the contribution from that person and appreciates the experience that they have, that they can provide the lessons that they've learned from their experience, right? And of course, you and I, we can either do things the hard way and learn from our own experiences, right? You remember the first time you gripped a semi-automatic pistol incorrectly and it cut the top of your thumb here?
I did, yes.
I did that too. Why were we so stupid we couldn't learn from somebody else, right? So we either learn it by doing it or we learn from what other people have experienced. Person that's been around for 80 years, they've learned a whole bunch of things that we don't know, right? So when you're talking about, their diet, like those, is it the Okinawans, I think, that they're in the blue zone, right? And they eat a whole bunch of sweet potatoes that were super, super healthy, right? But they're real active. They're out working in fields and, and very much connected to the land, right? And they live to be whatever, 150 years old, or I'm not sure that's the number, but they live a long time, and they have really, really good health as well. Just like, your father, grandpa, pardon me, 93 years old, great health, never had a headache, dies in a car accident. Hallelujah. That's a great way to go, right? And what a great, that as long as you're alive, you have good health. That's amazing if that happens for you, right?
So I think we're telling people a few things here, that if you feel despair, don't let it get a hold of you, right? Like, get up and move, go for a walk, jig around, put some music on, dance a bit, sing, yell, make noise. And people forget that internal movement is movement, right? Singing, for example, or yelling or chanting or anything, there's a whole bunch of muscles that are engaged to do that. There's a whole bunch of things going on.
I was just going to add to that is, so you're sad. Life isn't going very well. Ooh, that's a good time to sing the blues. Find a bluesy song that you could belt out about somebody who's having such a terrible life, and you'll feel better for sure. So,
I remember when Hank Williams Jr. came out with "There's a Tear in My Beer."
Oh yes, yeah.
That sort of whole country blues thing.
Yeah,
but yeah. So first thing you have to do is physically get going, and then what you want to do is also start looking for mental health. And there's different aspects or facets to mental health, and one of them is that your brain needs exercise. And you don't hear it so much anymore, but when I was younger, I used to hear, idle hands do the devil's work, and this idea that unless something is actively engaged in something, negative things occur. And that's very true with our mental situation, is if we sit and do nothing, often our minds will turn to negative things, right? With the internal saboteur, his voice gets louder.
Yeah.
The old saying about there's a gray wolf and a white wolf in each of us, and it's which one we feed becomes stronger.
Right.
And, that white wolf needs to be fed by engaging yourself and, reading something, doing a puzzle. Puzzle solving is a great mental activity. Learning languages, those sort of things have become cliche, but even engaging with yourself, there's lots of activities that can be mentally engaging, that, as you said, you don't need someone else, you don't need a bunch of money, you don't need a bunch of time.
Picking up the phone and calling a friend, that's an engaging thing, right?
Exactly.
And being there, being present for that phone conversation, right? There's value in that. That's engagement of your brain as well, right? So
I think that being present often that gets a lot of mysticism attached to it.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you know, I'm guilty of that too, I'm sure. But often being present just means staying focused and engaged with what it is you're doing. Don't let your mind drift off into, you know, oh boy, I forgot to do this, or oh, that's coming due, or, you know, all of these sort of things that encourage that feeling of despair in us, right? Hope kills.
Exactly. Just back to the present moment and being in the present moment. I don't know if this makes sense to you, and I think I might have even told it to you already, but I find when I'm now coaching somebody to shoot a pistol, that's one of the things I coach them on is, listen, you know what? You're here right now. Whatever happened 10 minutes ago, 2 hours ago, 5 days ago, 50 years ago, that's no part of this. Whatever's going to happen after you're done this activity, you don't have to worry about that for right now. This is where I want you to be, right here. And I want you to feel the pressure in your hand. I want you to feel your thumb on the side of the frame. I want you to feel the breeze coming through and, you know, mussing your hair. I want you to be right present for this event, right? And if I can get them there, man, the holes are always right in the center. Perfect, right? Because they're just focusing on that task, which is relatively easy to do if you don't go and mess it all up with all kinds of other errant things that take you away from that experience, right?
The other side of that is built into us. And there's been a lot of research done on this. And that's our brain's default is autopilot. And our brains are continually looking for ways to put things on autopilot.
Yeah, shortcut them, you bet. Yep.
You know, and they've done a lot of research, for example, driving. And basically, you know, backing out of your house in the first few kilometers of your trip, you're on autopilot, you know, and there's only like a short period of time that your brain is actually actively making decisions.
Yeah.
The rest of it is the sort of resting active state. It conserves energy. There's lots of reasons our minds do it, right? Yeah. Having brains as big as human beings do burn a lot of calories. They eat up a lot of resources, you know.
That's a way to eat less resources, right? I mean,
exactly.
Here's the habit. Here's the boom. Okay, I got it programmed. I don't even have to think about this anymore. I just do it, right? So yeah, which speaks to the value of habits too, right? Whatever that habit is. If the habit is, I'm going to focus on whatever. I have a timer on my watch, and every 2 hours, I'm going to take 90 seconds and breathe for a little bit, right? And then you get into that habit of doing that, and so that you don't have to think about time, and you allow that to happen, right? So. Yeah,
definitely. So I think you have to fight against the autopilot mode. I think you have to fight against the just sort of, you know, people talk about nothingness, but it's a very active nothingness in so much as that it's not just not focusing on the moment. It's exactly the opposite. It's focusing on the moment to free you from other distractions. And anything that engages your mind and keeps it occupied will improve your mood, will help with despair and feelings of negativity. The worst thing you can sort of do, and as human beings, we're really bad for this, is we learned at some time through our history that drugs and alcohol and certain chemical compounds can help our mind slip away into that non-active state.
It doesn't even have to be drugs and alcohol, does it? The big bag of potato chips or the, you know, 5 chocolate bars, you know, those are certainly the same kind of, a little bit different, but the same kind of a process, right? You're trying to get to a different state.
Yeah, secondary nervous system, right? So after you've eaten a bunch of stuff, your body releases hormones and chemicals to get you to rest, because our bodies are always trying to conserve energy. I mean, we were built for a time when we didn't have all the overabundance we have now. And that's part of the problem is, you know, we didn't have time for a lot of the mental illnesses or physical illnesses we do now because we were just working on survival. You know, it was out there every day rounding up, you know, grubs and whatever we could eat. There's been some interesting archaeological research that maybe we weren't hunter-gatherers, we were scavengers a lot of the time through our history, and that we would scavenge a lot of protein and nourishment that other animals had killed or left behind, or that we chased off. So whatever the case is, we obviously at a time now where we can have meals delivered. We don't have to do anything. We can sit on the couch and, we don't even have to dial the phone now. We just have to tell our phone to dial.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That. So I think we have to make choices. That's one of the tools, is make choices to engage, make choices to be active and to get up and do things. One of the other tools we have, and it's really interesting, is inspirational tools. Sorry?
Inspirational tools. Sorry. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, so, and this means different things to a lot of different people, right? Like, I think anyone who knows you would say that obviously Al finds music inspirational.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Stories of positivity, people overcoming things and, growing is something that inspires you. A good story, a good book about those types of things. For me, I love loud, fast, hard music. That inspires me. Poetry inspires me. Prayer inspires me, and not the sort of high level kind of really thoughtful prayer that your minister gives, but just, saying the Lord's Prayer and the Rosary. I remember I learned the Rosary as an adult, not as a child. I wasn't born into an Episcopal church. I was born into the sort of United Lutheran Baptist mix of prairie life. And the Rosary for me is really inspirational. I find that if I engage my mind just repeating the Rosary or the Lord's Prayer, that it'll calm my body down enough that I can actually start to focus and think.
What is the Rosary?
It's a series of prayers done in a numerical order that it's got Our Fathers and Hail Marys in it and the Creed in it. So you say different prayers in, what a rosary is, right? The beads with a cross on it.
Oh, yeah. Okay, beads and cross. That's a rosary.
Yeah,
okay, yeah.
So you count. You don't have to. You can get them for your finger or use a rope or not use them at all if you've done it a lot. And you count them, and depending on what bead you're on is what prayer you say. And some people attack that and say, well, there's no meaning in it. It's just rote memorization. For me, I like Hail Marys. They're soothing to me. And so,
it's a form, isn't it a form of affirmation, right?
It is, yeah. It's a Hail Mary full of grace, and goes on.
Yeah, I mean, you're telling you that, and that's changing you, and that's changing energy that you're putting out as well, right? Yeah, that makes good sense to me.
And so, I find that inspirational. And music, and, I talked to people and said, hey, what inspires you? And, of course, religious books, religion was big, but then basic things, scents, smell of flowers. We identified images of hope last show, 2 shows ago. Anyway,
remember Sheila was a big contributor. She was throwing in all kinds of suggestions on the chat there.
Well, and I think that we need to put inspirational items in our tool belt, and we have to get really good. Like both you and I love the shooting sports, and one of the things that we practice on is clearing jams, right? And if you want to be an effective athlete or sports person in shooting sports, one of the things you have to practice for and get really good at is when things go wrong.
They're going to go wrong.
They are. Yeah. Exactly. And, the faster you go, the better you are, the more things are going to go wrong. It's just that you get much better at dealing with them, and it's automatic, right?
Yeah.
And, what I'm proposing is the research that I was able to go through really showed that if you're in the same way, if you're good at clearing despair or depression or negativity, the same way that we would clear a jam pistol, ipsa.
That's like a book, Scott. That's a book. You got to write a book about that. That's excellent.
You've already written a book.
That's excellent. So that basically you're prepared. That there's going to be failures, that things aren't going to go right every day. That's the reality of how things are. But when they do, here's the plan. Here's how we're going to get back on track and get moving again, right? And part of that is get moving, right? Part of that is what you're telling yourself. Part of that is what's the next thing you do? Is it eat the piece of junk food, or is it have a glass of water and 5 breaths, and then that kind of a thing, right? So
it's going to be different for everyone. And as I was saying, for me, if I remember to go to my tool belt If I start getting in an interdialogue, I can break that by repeating a prayer I'm comfortable with or that I enjoy.
Sure.
And you know, and I keep repeating it until my mind has settled down enough that I'm not going to go to that negative place. And, you know, for other people, it might be reading poetry, it might be painting, it might be running, it might be, who knows what it is. But
you know what?
You should know, right?
We should all have like our tool belts, like visible, like Batman's tool belt,
Yeah.
right? Oh, so you use that. I've never tried that. I should give that a go, right? Oh, the sparkly room chaser upper thingy. Oh, let's try to give that a go, right? So, yeah.
Well, and I'll go one farther. And I think that it would be really good as family members, as community members, that if we, you know, the people we care about, it would be really good, you know, if when you saw me getting wound up or you saw me getting down about something, you know, if you could say, hey, how's Mary, Scott? You know, or, you know, to remind me to go to my tool belt.
And pick up a Hail Mary out of there. Oh,
yeah. Yeah, exactly. Or, you know, hey, Al, what was that song that was on the radio an hour ago? Your mind couldn't help but go to that good place, right?
That's a good point. That's a good point.
And
what a way to encourage each other, right? What a way to support each other. From like, there's always, human life has problems. So if you're having a challenge and somebody gives you extends an offer of help, maybe that's all it is. Just, hey, maybe it's just, hey, you got this. You're okay.
Well,
man.
You and I don't embarrass easily, which is why we come on here and talk about the craziest stuff that goes on in our heads. But I think we should do more of that as a species, as a people, as, you know, husbands, wives, boyfriends, girlfriends, mothers, fathers, grandparents, aunts, uncles, neighbors, whatever, is that we should really talk about it, you know, talk about, wow, you know, what's on your tool belt? How do you deal with this? And then we should talk about it in schools. We should talk about it in, you know, any places we gather with more than one. We should really share with each other, you know, as you said, not only solutions, but what can you remind me of when you see me spinning up?
Yeah.
And, you know, I know in working with kids in Japan, and I'm not going to say what countries, but kids who came from certain countries, a high percentage of them were on medication to change their behavior. And we were able to in all cases, every child stop that medication and replace it with a tool. You know? And you know, whether it was a physical activity, whether it was a song, whether it was humming, whether it was rocking back and forth. And we seem in our society to be really unhappy if people look weird or strange. Like, you know, what is Al doing? Why is he weaving back and forth? Stand still, man. You're a grown man. You know, you're a captain of industry and a leader of people. Why are you weaving back and forth like a mongoose? You know, because it makes you a better person. Right? It helps you deal with what could be really negative and destructive forces if you just let them get out of control.
Yep.
And so I think that
you can actually, like, you can look at it two ways. People could say, oh, he is self-soothing, right? He's doing something to soothe himself. That's a fair statement. I prefer self-optimizing. If this gets me to a little bit more energy, a little bit more presence, then it's a great activity. I'm buying it. I'm adopting that activity, right? So
I know, again, when I was young, I worked in a country bar as a bouncer.
I recall. Well, I recall the story, not the reciprocal.
I don't know how to say that in a nice way, but yeah, so security, whatever. And one of the things that we saw is, you know, and probably not a fair gender assessment, but if we would see a big guy, you know, getting angry, he's had too much to drink and he's getting really angry, if somebody he cared about would move closer to him, he would usually calm down.
Interesting.
If they moved away from him, usually that escalated things.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so often there's an area of space that when you get inside that space, people find it comforting, not threatening, and that space is different for everyone. So far away can agitate things. Sometimes that's where you need to be. sometimes it's not. But the more we get to know people around us, then we get to know what space they're comfortable with.
Right. Yeah.
In different cultures, that space bubble changes. And where we stand to somebody can encourage them to calm down. It can encourage them to get more agitated or excited. And, in terms of controlling despair, in terms of staying hopeful and positive and moving forward, I think it's important to really explore all these tools. And you and I have talked about some of them tonight, but there's so many more. Exactly. What are some other ones you can think of, Al?
I mean, the tools that we're expressing, they might not be the tool that works for you, but there is a tool that works for you, right? It's just a matter of just kind of finding the one that works. And there's like people with harmonics and humming and those kind of things that works great for them, right? And whistling or moving in certain ways, or qigong or whatever. There's so many different tools that are available. So we encourage you to check that out, right, Scott?
We do. I was thinking of somebody, friends of ours, the Kerbers. You know the Kerbers?
Sure.
Kerbers. And anyone who was out trick-or-treating in downtown Lethbridge knows the Kerbers. They're your friendly pirates. They, yes. The holidays. And, I was watching some video that they had put up, and I enjoy seeing the dioramas, the realities that they create in their yard and with their house. And just how happy that makes them, when they talk about it and you watch them, you can see that they're, of course, it's hard work. And, they were out in freezing cold weather, dressed up in pirate costumes and handed out candy and talking to people. But you can see they're happy, right? You can see that those activities really have value to them. Yeah. And so, building a fully realistic pirate ship in your yard and, those types of things, most of us wouldn't consider a positive activity, affirmation, but you look at the Kerbers and you can see how much joy they get out of that. And there's so many examples around. If you're observant and you actually watch for it, you can see people self-optimizing all the time. Don't you think? And
I think so. I think so.
If I remember, I'm pretty lazy, I forget to. But sometimes I catch myself watching people and thinking, boy, they're really enjoying that. I wonder I should try that.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that ultimately that's our message today, right? Is that to get away from despair is don't let it turn into something worse and more permanent. Realize that it is usually when you're in a situation of real despair, there's not much you can do about it in the moment, but ride it out.
Well, and if in advance, you kind of have your tool belt ready, if this happens, here's my go-to, right, to help. So, yeah. So
we're encouraging people to explore the idea of having a tool belt of hope, a mental health tool belt, if you will. Is that what we're saying?
That's exactly what we're saying. And if you want, get it and wear it. And then you can have little labels on each of the little hope number 1. Let's try this one. See if that works. I did it as a drink. I didn't mean it to be as a drink, but you know what I mean? You activate hope tool number 1. And if that works, hallelujah. If it doesn't, you go to hope tool number 2. So
we could do a whole cartoon, Batman and his utility belt. We could have Hope Man or woman or non-gender specific for that matter.
Hey, you know this amazing artist. She can figure that stuff out, right?
Sure. But yeah, be kind to people. Look for those things. Develop your own tool belt. Don't be afraid to talk to people about their tool belt and how we don't ask each other enough how we deal with pain or despair or stress or depression. We really don't. We keep those things secret, even from the people we love. And we don't just have that gentle conversation or maybe that exciting, robust, raucous conversation where we talk about the things that bother us and what we do. Because as a species, we're pretty smart. We've dealt with a lot of stuff and we've grown and changed and evolved. And I think instead of trying to do everything on our own, talking about it more and asking more questions and sharing more is definitely the way forward.
Thriving together. We can do that, right? All right.
Gotcha.
Scott, my friend, I thank you. That was a fun discussion again, like normal. We'll see you next Thursday.
You bet, buddy. Take care.